Hey everyone, welcome to Beyond Logs, why it's an exciting time to be a defender with myself, Anton Ovrutsky. Before we get started with the actual content of the talk, I just wanted to give a brief outline of kind of like why this talk exists and why I'm here. A couple months ago, I was lucky enough to be on the build team for C3X that you just really eloquently heard about. And as part of that process, I was telling the other build members how excited I was for the students to kind of see the logs that we had configured for them. Just because I'm a huge nerd, I love logs, so I was excited to kind of share those with the students and for them to kind of see what attacks look like in a network that's primarily Windows. And then from there, I had like a cosmic brain moment where I thought, it's just not just an exciting time for the students. I think it's an exciting time to be a defender in this space generally, just because there's a lot of new tooling and new data points available to people in this space. And I hope that by the end of this talk, everyone kind of agrees with me. So with that in mind, here's what we're going to talk about. I'm going to start off with my personal favorite, Sysmon. Move on, yeah, that's right, Sysmon, all right. Move on over to generic rule formats with Sigma, and the network monitoring side of things with Moloch, full packet capture, then Active Directory with Bloodhound, and then rounding off with Cape and Silk ETW. So let's just start off with Sysmon. And I think traditionally the view of Sysmon has been kind of, you install it on a system and it gives you a bunch of new events that you have to work with. And those events are kind of isolated from each other. And I think that this image made by Roberto Rodriguez when he worked at SpectraOps does a really good job of kind of showing us that Sysmon is not just a list of events. It's its own ecosystem, kind of like living and breathing, and the events are all connected to each other. And at the kind of heart of that is the process event. And some of you may have heard the concept of moving from lists to graphs when you're thinking about, defensive architecture and logging and stuff like that. And I think that viewing Sysmon events this way helps us to kind of drive towards that concept. So here's how I kind of envision that. And the first example I'm going to go over is just image load events. These are type 7 from Sysmon. So this query is just showing you, I know it's kind of hard to see, but the text doesn't really matter. It's just kind of like how it's presented is what I'm driving towards. So in this case, the query is just showing you what images are loaded by this executable. And in this case, the executable is a Silent Trinity stager. It's a new C2 framework that was released in the last couple months. So you're not looking at the events kind of in a list format. You're looking at them in a what was done by this process kind of way. So it's just more helpful to look at events this way. And the slides will be available after, and you can kind of like copy my query if you want after that. Look at this kind of same concept another way. You can combine process and network events with Sysmon as well to give you a really powerful view of what's going on. And in this particular case, this is a Metasploit payload, so it's just using a PowerShell script. I think looking at this event, or looking at these events this way, kind of helps you from an alarming point of view as well. So you might not want to alert every time PowerShell makes a network connection, because that probably happens pretty often. But you might want to alert if PowerShell makes a network connection with a nasty command line like this. So taking this concept to its kind of logical conclusion, just show me everything. So this particular query is just selecting all the values that Sysmon has based on a particular process GUID. And then if there's more than 2 event types associated with that process GUID, it's returning results. So in this particular case, I ran PowerShell 3 times on a test system, but only one of those times was PowerShell actually doing anything malicious, and that's the bottom event there. And the difference between that, I know it's hard to see, is that the bottom event has a network connect event associated with the PowerShell process. So PowerShell opened, it created files, it connected to pipes in all the instances, but only in the third one did it actually make a network connection. So if you have like tens of thousands of events to sift through, these kinds of queries can kind of help you at least narrow down your results and give you kind of like where do you want to start looking at first. We could view this a different way, and this is just a force-directed visualization for Splunk. And you can kind of see, you don't necessarily know that something malicious happened on the system, but you see that top left corner, there's just more stuff going on. So if you're looking at, again, thousands of systems at once, views like this will help you kind of narrow down where you want to start looking at first. So moving over to Sigma, and Sigma is just a tool that allows you to write generic rule formats. So you're not writing a query that's specific to ArcSight or Splunk or Elastic. You can write it in a Sigma format and then convert it to those other systems. I just wanted to quickly highlight one new feature of Sigma, value modifiers. So on the left-hand side is a Sigma rule looking for PowerShell IEX, which is invoke expression. And what this rule is doing is looking for the base 64 offsets of IEX. So when you convert that rule, in my case, to a Splunk query, you can see on the bottom right there that it's spitting out the base 64 values of IEX. So this saves you just a ton of time from having to convert your different queries from base 64 or base 32 or whatever you happen to be doing. There's a bunch of other benefits to Sigma as well. Chief among them is just easier to write sim rules this way. You don't have to log into your sim. You just write the rule in the regular text editor. There's space for comments and tags. And because the rules are just text files, you can treat them as config files. So if you use GitHub or something like that, you can do version control and change control and all that fun stuff. Like I mentioned, the queries are portable. So you can write a query in Elastic and then convert it to whatever sim format you like. And you can also share queries. So if you write a really cool one, please share it. Moving on to the network side of things with Moloch full packet capture. This is kind of what it looks like. It's a product made by AOL, fully open source, modular. It runs Elasticsearch on the back end. And Moloch itself is it's meant to sit at the end of a TAP or span port or a network packet broker device or something like that. And it just sucks in and indexes packets for you. And it presents them in this really awesome GUI that's really easy to use. And the search query for this is similar to Wireshark. So if you're used to manipulating packets or searching for packets in Wireshark, Moloch will feel at home. One of the cool features about Moloch too is that it's able to run Suricata IDS on the same box, and the eve.json file that is generated by Suricata can be fed back into Moloch to enrich the packet data. So you don't just look at the IDS alert, you're looking at the full packet that IDS alert fired on. So really handy to have, really powerful stuff. Another feature of Moloch is that it's capable of calculating and showing you JA3 hashes. And for those of you who are not aware, JA3 is a technology that'll fingerprint a TLS connection. So on the left-hand side there, you see the TLS handshake occurring, and the kind of bytes of those packets are hashed together to make a JA3 hash. And you can kind of see how Moloch displays that. And what you can do from there is use a service like JA3er to look up that JA3 hash to see kind of what client it belongs to. So in this case, the JA3 hash that I'm looking at is a interpreter payload. There's a bunch of additional features for Moloch as well. It has a wide service, so it's capable of ingesting data from something like EPO or SCCM to enrich the IP data. So you're looking at host names and usernames, not IP addresses. You can take in vulnerability feeds from something like Alien Vault OTX as well. And you can translate those JA3 hashes to friendly names and start to kind of baseline your environment and get an idea of kind of what's talking to what over encrypted channels. Moloch also has Yarrow support, so if you're into writing Yarrow rules, Moloch is capable of processing those. It's modular, scalable, so if you have a network with a bunch of different segments, you can put in a bunch of different Moloch capture nodes to kind of suck in packets from all those networks. And Moloch also has a really great Slack channel. I recently deployed this in my environment, and being a noob, I asked a whole bunch of annoying questions, and they were really kind and patient with me, so if you do decide to try it, check out the Slack channel. They're really nice and helpful. It also has an API, so you can get data back out of it. Click actions, so you're not copy and pasting values from it. You can just kind of right-click on an element and send it to a service of your choice, like VirusTotal or GrayNoise. And you can do hunts as well. So you can write like a regex query and tell Moloch, I want to find this particular regex over X period of time, and Moloch will kind of do that search for you. So really powerful stuff. It's kind of amazing that it's free. So moving over onto the AD side of things with Bloodhound, and Bloodhound itself has traditionally kind of been viewed as an offensive security tool, but defenders can use it as well. And if you haven't seen it, this is kind of what it looks like. This screenshot here is just showing you how to get from a low privileged user on the left-hand side to a high privileged account on the right in a graph format. I get asked a lot, kind of like, I've heard of Bloodhound, but what do I do with it? Chief among the things that you can do with it is find a path from a low privileged user to domain admin, keeping in mind that domain admins may not be the kind of the crown jewels in your organization. You can find curb roastable users, so that's service accounts with weak passwords. Basically all your Active Directory secrets, especially if they have to do with like group memberships or OUs, Bloodhound will do a good job of collecting that data and visualizing it for you. And this is something that I haven't personally played with too much, but if anyone out there has, please let me know, is feeding the data that is collected by Bloodhound back into the SIM. And my thinking there is that, if you're looking at 2 or 3 accounts that potentially got compromised, you might want to know that one of those accounts is an admin to 100 systems versus one of them accounts being admin to 2 systems. So that's the kind of data that Bloodhound can easily provide for you. Whatever you do, please, if you find value out of Bloodhound, please donate. That's kind of their unofficial donation channel there, the Muscular Dystrophy Association. Moving over to CAPE now. CAPE stands for Curl Artifact Parser and Extractor. It's kind of a mouthful. It was written pretty recently by Eric Zimmerman. And this is kind of what it looks like. This is the GUI front end to CAPE called gcape. And on the left-hand side there is kind of what you want collected from your system. So you can see by the size of the scroll bar there that CAPE is capable of collecting a whole bunch of data for you. It could do master file table, memory dumps, all kinds of stuff. On the right-hand side is you telling CAPE what you want done with that data, how you want it parsed and processed. CAPE supports a whole bunch of different collection methods and parsers and all that, and they're always being updated. So the idea here is that you would kind of build what you want CAPE to do via the GUI, and then you would just copy out that command line and kind of run it on the endpoints that you believe to be potentially compromised. And this is kind of just what the output looks like from CAPE. On the right-hand side is just the output from ipconfig and netstat. So really simple stuff, but stuff that's actually really handy to have if you're looking at malicious things in a network. Rounding off now with Silk ETW, which is kind of the newest tool out there for us defenders. So traditionally, ETW or trace logs in Windows have been really hard to kind of collect. You needed a C++ program or some kind of weird PowerShell wrapper. And even if that did work, the file that would be generated would just be like a flat text file that's really difficult to work with. So one of the main features of Silk ETW is that it's able to collect those event trace logs and kind of shove them into the event log. So you can collect it with your Beats agent or WEF or Splunk forwarder, whatever you're using. It also runs as a service, so if you're actually using it in production, it's capable of doing that for you. In this example, what I'm doing is running, excuse me, I'm running the Silent Trinity stager, so the same one that I showed earlier, but this is just a PowerShell version of it, and it's being reflectively loaded, so that's kind of like the new hotness in the offensive space. And this is what the output of Silk ETW looks like, and I know it's hard to see, but on the right-hand side there, this query is just showing you Silk ETW collecting the info from the Silent Trinity stager, and it's loading a booleang executable or assembly. I haven't run this in production, so I haven't run this at scale, and I haven't looked at the data, but I would imagine that in most environments, something loading booleang assemblies in memory would be anomalous and would probably warrant a second look. And I'm kind of taking this concept further, and I'm linking the ETW logs to the sysmon logs via the process ID. So in this example, I get to see the command line, the parent command line, as well as the images that were loaded all in memory. So it's combining two really powerful sources of logs and giving you quite a bit of visibility. So takeaways, I hope that I went through a lot here, and I hope that everyone kind of sees that there's a lot of stuff available to us all in the defensive space. Most of what I covered is free, I think with the exception of Splunk. Most of it is available today. Most of it is pretty well documented, and if it's not, there's a Slack channel somewhere where you'll find help. So I think that there's a lot of excitement in this space because of all those factors. The second point there, I think moving from lists to graphs is incredibly powerful and necessary to catch up with all the cool stuff that the red teams are doing. The middle point there, using your data, I think that's also important. I think a lot of us probably have sysmon logs available to us, but we're not really combining them in a way that sysmon kind of allows for. The second to last point there is that this is all really hard. There's a lot of configuration involved. The spaces, the little tabs, the field names, all that stuff will drive you insane. So if you're trying to, replicate this in a lab or at work and you're running into problems, don't feel alone. Even putting these slides together for the screenshots was incredibly difficult. And the last point there, visibility rules, and I mean that in kind of two ways. Rules as in like O'Doyle rules, like visibility is awesome. And then the second sense is that it rules, meaning it takes priority. So if you have like a network segment or you have Windows boxes or Linux boxes or whatever, and you're not getting logs from them, start because it's just becoming critically important. I'll end it there. Any questions?
Oh, right.
Right on.
Very good talk, sir.
Thank you.
Question for you. I think with a lot of the open source defensive tools that are out there, of which are amazing, sysmon and all the stuff you're showing, there's still always a lot of, at the almost enterprise level, you don't always see a lot of adoption. Mm-hmm. And I think on one hand, there's the, just, hey, well, this doesn't come with support and a license and that weird sense of like, I'd rather pay for something.
Yeah.
But aside from that, do you think one of the problems is, because, I know this can happen with sysmon or silk ETW, is just the matter that as great as these tools are, as is, at scale, they start becoming very difficult to manage.
Yeah.
Like, do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah. Installing sysmon, silk ETW, like in a lab environment or something, pretty simple. At scale, becomes increasingly difficult. In my particular environment, I run sysmon on about 1,000 endpoints. And we had to write a custom app that took care of the config changes. So the app basically goes out and looks for if a master config file was changed, and if it was, it cycles it. So there's a lot of just because sysmon exists doesn't mean that you can just install it in your production environment tomorrow, unfortunately. But I think that the benefit it provides, same with silk ETW, and the flexibility it offers you, I find that I've worked with a couple EDRs, and they all miss certain things, and that's okay. But you can't really, you can't write your own stuff for a lot of these EDRs, and if you can, it's like an add-on product. So I think that's kind of where the benefit of sysmon and silk ETW and tools like that are. But yeah, if your organization doesn't like open source for whatever reason, I mean, it becomes a business decision at that point of examining the risk of getting hacked versus the risk of your open source software crapping out on you. So I know the decision I would make personally, but every organization is different. Hope that answers the question.
By the way, good question, Lee, because my question is very similar to yours. So I use the Holy Trinity, which is the sysmon, usquery, and volatility. My question actually was originally similar to what Lee had asked. So my EPS in an enterprise environment is terribly low because it doesn't scale. So I'm going to change my question and ask you, what are your thoughts on actually augmenting usquery and volatility in an enterprise model?
That's a really good question. I haven't used osquery in a production environment myself. I played with it at home. I think it's awesome, but in terms of volatility, I don't know like, I'm not sure of your use case, and I don't know how you're using that day to day. My understanding of volatility that it was kind of like an after the fact, that you take the memory dump of a compromised system and then you analyze it after. So I think I don't really have a good answer to your question, but it sounds like you're doing amazing work and you're on the right track.
Any more questions? All right. Well, thank you very much.